All right. Hello, students. Um, well, I guess for today, I'll say students in geography as taught by Adam Pine. Um, though I may revise some of this video later in life and use it for other folks. My name's David. Adam asked me if I had some kind of structure for an assignment about grant writing, and I thought I could record a video to kind of walk you through what I do in grant writing. I guess I want to divide it into three parts. The first is learning to understand the funders. The second is learning to understand your organization. And the third is coming to understand what a fundable project looks like. So with all of that said, let's start by understanding what is, for the Duluth area, a totally cool funder. So this is the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation website, and I use this in a lot of my classes, and perhaps you'll use it when you're working with Dr. Pine, because it hosts many, many different kinds of grants. In fact, let's start by looking at something. If you have a younger brother or sister who's interested in going to college, they have a very cool scholarship program. What kinds of scholarships, you might wonder? If you click here, you'll see that there are scholarships specifically for Duluth Public High School seniors attending the UMD or Twin Cities campus. Here's one that's just for public high school senior boys on the track and or cross country team. Here's a scholarship to arts or visual arts students who graduate with the Duluth or Superior High School to attend UMD or UWS. What you're going to find in a lot of these scholarships are basically someone who was successful in life and tries to help someone who's on a similar path to them move forward the way they were able to move forward. So Frank L. Barrows and his son, I'm going to guess, may have attended Evelyn Gilbert Senior High School. And so the scholarship was established honoring their memory to serve students from Evelyn and Gilbert who are going on to college. I'm going to guess that Catherine A. Bullion possibly attended Hermantown High School or otherwise has really strong connections to Hermantown. And so has established a scholarship supporting those kinds of students. I start with this page, number one, because if you have a chance to visit it, you'll see that there are lots of cool resources here serving all sorts of different students. And you might know someone in your family might be eligible for it. But the other thing is to recognize that all of these grants have stories, right? There's a story behind the Darylyn Palchi-Asselin, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Scholarship Fund. There's a story behind the Peter By Family Scholarship Fund, which assists UMD medical students in their preparation to become doctors in small towns in the Community Foundation service area. There's stories behind these, and if you can understand those stories, you might be better able to understand the priorities of the grant and therefore be able, of the grant program, and then be better able to write an application for it. So if we move from the scholarship section to the grants section, what kinds of grants does the Duluth Superior Area Foundation offer? Let's see. I'm going to go to the Find a Fund button here. And based on the nature of this class, I'm going to start with environment as a keyword. And these are some of the grant opportunities which specifically connect to environmental issues. So there is the Fund for the Environment, which reflects a growing community concern and awareness of our interdependency with our environment. So that in the past, for the city of Grand Marais, which is up near the Canadian border, it's funded a Trails and Parks project. For the College of St. Scholastica, it's funded a green rooftop garden demonstration project. For the Lake Superior Energy Association, it's funded a conference. Oh, it's even funded a early adopters documentary for KCCI. Very cool. If we go back to that list for a second, we'll see the Four Cedars Environmental Fund was established to provide financial incentives that initiate, stimulate, enrich, and assist programs and organizations involved in the protection, preservation, and education of the unique natural resources found primarily within the Western Lake Superior watershed. I bet there are lots of projects you have been involved with or will be involved with in the next stages in your coursework and career that would resonate with the priorities of this grant. It's even got a fund guidelines button. Let's see what we see when we see there. You can take a look at this later. Their primary priorities, it looks like, are to fund programs and organizations with capital requests, startup costs, technical assistance, and project program support. And those may be words that don't mean a whole lot to you. We'll come back to that, I promise. Okay. I'd be curious to know what the story is behind the Four Cedars Environmental Fund. Why does it carry that name? What is it honoring when it does that? The Lone Wolf Fund promotes environmental education through programs that increase access for children with physical and/or mental disabilities. It also advances medicine through research, particularly for cancer and diabetes. Kind of overlapping insofar as it's working with the next generation, but interesting to see how these are kind of pulled together. I wonder what the story is behind this grant. Past projects have included support for a naturalist at Hartley Nature Center or similar organizations like the Great Lakes Aquarium and the Wolf Ridge Environmental Center, support for a naturalist to attend a workshop or a class, support for transportation, school staff, assistive technology or equipment, which would increase access for students with disabilities to environmental programs. Nice, a lot of different cool stuff here. If you're going to be a successful grant writer, you have to understand the source of money you're looking at, and you have to understand the story that helps you frame the priorities behind it. Typed in hunger for our keyword here, again, because of some of the work you've been doing with Dr. Pine. And that gives us the Knight Foundation grant, which supports civic innovators who help cities attract and keep talented people, expand economic opportunity, and create a culture of engagement. Much broader in its mission, although it connects very well with what we understand the Knight Foundation's priorities to be. And if I were to apply for this grant, I'd want to look more deeply at the Knight Foundation and its story. So again, using food as the keyword this time, I see the Red Cliff Fund, whose mission is to assist programs and services that will contribute to the traditional values of the Ojibwe of art through its arts, language, medicinal foods, and ceremonies in Red Cliff, Wisconsin. Very limited in its geography, serving a very particular community, but helping them with, for example, dietary health programs, social services, and substance abuse, which perhaps connects with some of the things you've studied with Dr. Pine this semester. So the first bit of advice I have is to come to understand the sources, the stories, the donors, the organizations that make the grant you're seeking possible. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to hit the pause button, and then I'll come back in a minute for more. So now to talk about how you learn about your organizations. If you become someone who writes grants on behalf of an organization for which you work full time, that's easy. You become enculturated to the organization as part of your onboarding and your everyday work with the organization. If, on the other hand, you are a grant writer, and so you are writing on behalf of organizations for whom you don't have an ongoing professional relationship, you need to learn how to figure out what the organization is about quickly and efficiently. And I'm going to talk to you about some of those strategies here. Along the way, I'm going to end up, for some of you, I think, teaching you a little bit of like nonprofit language, right? How to understand how nonprofits work, what the different kinds of nonprofits are, the kind of vocabularies and tools that they use to get their work done. So that if you do decide to go on to work in a nonprofit some way, you come in knowing something about what's up. The easiest ways to get at that, while also feeling like you're working on the grant application, is to start to figure out, what does the grant application ask for? So I'm going to go to the grant. Dun, dun, dun. That's actually my email, not the grant. So we're just going to close that window. And that's also not the grant. No, that's not it either. There we go. This is the short form. I'm going to be shuttling back and forth across a lot of windows, and you're going to hear me go oops up more than once. So this is the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation's short grant application form. We're going to start with the short one. We're going to walk through some stuff here. Then we're going to go to the larger one so that you can learn a little bit about organizations by figuring out what a grant wants. So for starters, and I know it's going to sound weird, but the first thing they ask for is the name of the organization. Well, isn't that just, for example, CHUM, right? That's an organization I think you've studied in this class context. And, maybe you would want to spell it out: Churches United in Ministry. Okay, that feels like it's done, but that's picking an easy one for whom the answer to the question is easy. Let's take a look at a related organization which also works to mitigate hunger. You may have learned in this class about an organization called Ruby's Pantry, which does kind of purchase-based food pantry food giveaways. You can give them $20 and you leave with $200 worth of food. It's a different model for mitigating hunger in communities. They work out of pop-up churches all over the state, or pop-up venues within churches all over the state. And they, though, are legally known as Home and Away Ministries. And Ruby's Pantry is just one of the ministries, one of the organizations that Home and Away Ministries maintains. So that's why they ask for both the name of the organization and the legal name. Pausing. All right. So I paused there because I realized I didn't explain to you how it was that I knew that Ruby's Pantry operated under a different name. And now I'm going to talk to you about how I knew that and how you can learn a lot, both for filling out the information that's necessary on a grant application and just to learn a lot about a nonprofit anyway. And if you're ever offered a job at a nonprofit, this may be a helpful way to get some background on them. Every nonprofit, at least in the 501c3 category, is required to file a 990 form with the Internal Revenue Service. Every 990 form has to be publicly available because it's the kind of justification to the government, to the world, and to other taxpayers for why this organization should qualify as tax exempt. So you can look up the 990 for any 501c3 nonprofit in the United States. And so this is the 501c3 for Ruby's Pantry, or the 501c3 technically for Home and Away Ministries, which does business as Ruby's Pantry, among other things. If we were to visit the CHUM 501 990 form, You'll see that a lot of really cool information required on the grant sheet is also listed here. So let's just work through this together, shall we? We need the address of the organization. Here is the address of the organization. We need the phone number. Is that something available here? There it is. We need the employer identification number. The employer identification number is kind of like the social security number for a nonprofit organization or for any organization that has employees. So like you have a social security number, the employer has an employer identification number. Here is Chum's employer identification number. That would go here. Website. That's not actually available in the 990. However, luckily, we can go straight to the website that's freely available through Google to get that information. The name of top paid staff or board chair. The 990 records that for us. It's Lee Stewart. All right. What is their title? I bet we can find that later in the document. So if I use the find command here, scroll down, they are the executive director based on the signature block. Could fill in their title as executive director there. Can we get their email? Probably. If it's not on this document, I'd be tempted to go back to the Chum website to find that. Contact phone. We can use the organizational contact phone. Is your organization an IRS 501c3 not-for-profit public entity or unit of government? So there are multiple kinds of nonprofits, and the central one that most people think of is a 501c3. And the key feature of a 501c3 from my perspective, twofold. It doesn't operate for a profit. That should be obvious. And number two, if I donate to it, I am eligible to deduct that from my taxes at the end of the year. That's a significant difference. There are other nonprofit organizations where if I donate to them, it is not tax deductible. Those are 501c4s, I think. I should have Googled that. Sorry, guys. Like political organizations, lobbying organizations, maybe not for profit, but because they're actively involved in the political process, I can't get a tax write-off for donating to them. So they're not officially a 501c3. There are some nonprofit organizations which are too small to be a 501c3. And so they operate in a kind of, with a relationship with another nonprofit that can serve as their fiscal agent. So for example, you may have studied the First Ladies of the Hillside in this class, which is a small group of people doing non-profit, do-gooder work, let's call it that way. Dun-dun. Grassroots group of women who are working together from inside the Central Hillside community. That's awesome. They are too small to be officially a 501c3 at the moment. They operate with a fiscal agent, and I think their fiscal agent is the Zeitgeist. The Zeitgeist serves as fiscal agent for a number of organizations around town. They are the fiscal agent for everything, like the Duluth Poet Laureate program operates with the Zeitgeist as their fiscal agent, so that the Zeitgeist basically guarantees that they operate with the principles of a 501c3, even if they haven't become one officially yet. Usually what happens then is the fiscal agent takes a little off the top as a kind of service fee. So this question asks, are you a 501c3? And if not, do you have a fiscal agent? And here, for example, the First Ladies would type the Zeitgeist into this box. The total organization budget. that's this box right here. And sometimes it's helpful to learn something about the scope of an organization. If we were to go back here to the 990 for Chum, we would see that their total revenues for 2018 were $3,199,944. And for 2019, they were $3,695,411. It's fairly big. There are other organizations with infinitely smaller and other organizations with a lot more floating around this fine Duluth in which we live. We'll come back to some of these other boxes in a second. Okay. So in the short form of the Duluth Superior Area Foundation grant, you're asked to provide a summary of the organization's history, mission, and programs. To find the mission, I almost always go to the website and click on the About Us page. And somewhere buried in here, you're going to see the mission in this first sentence. And you'll see the history running through here. And the programming is going to be everything summarized down here. That set of information is what this box is asking for. Now the 990 can be a place to look for that, except because it's written for the government and not for the public, you're going to find that the description of the mission might be pretty thin. So here you'll see the 990 for Chum offers much less detail than some of the other documentation. Here are the grant writing ease versions, the federal reporting ease language versions of those 3 areas of activity that were described here. See if I can go back to the, yep, here we are. This is the Home and Away Ministries. So Home and Away Ministries mission statement as reported to the federal government is super short and super uninteresting. You definitely want to go to their website to talk more about what's going on there. Here are the descriptions of their programs. A little better, still needs a little bit of work. I bet their website would complement this. Why do I want you to know the mission, history, and programs? It helps show that you're writing with credibility, right? Why does the grant writer want to know those things? They want to make sure that your mission and values are consonant with that story behind the grant that I was talking about earlier. I'm going to pause for a second. All right. Going to go to the end of the short form application for a second and talk about the budget page, right? This looks daunting, and how would you ever possibly know this? Well, it would be hard to know unless you had the 990 in front of you. So if we're writing about Chum, for example, we would know dun, 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 that contributions and grants total about $3,600,000. And this takes grants and contributions and separates them out a little bit. You could ask a quick question in an email to someone to get the rest, but the important thing to know is that the beginnings, at least, of this information is here. If we looked at the investment income, Investment income is reported on the 990 here. If we looked at the fundraising events, that is reported. Well, the fundraising fees are reported here. Chum spent 0 on fundraising fees. That's interesting. That would be recorded in professional fees down here. You can see that all I'm basically doing is kind of shuttling back and forth between the 990 and what the question asks for here to get as close as I can. And then if you were actually writing the grant outside of a class context, you could break it down more for in more detail. There is a question about how much money they spend on salaries. And you can get that broken down here. And you can see that the executive director of Chum makes $72,000 a year. The finance director makes $61,000 a year. And the rest of the board is unpaid. The total amount of spent at Chum on salaries is up here. Salaries, compensation, and benefits for a total of about $1.5 million. Again, all of that corresponds to this box here. You want to know about the board of directors? The 990 records the board of directors. There may be a more recently updated one on the website, but you can always use the 990 to get us a start. And that's a kind of beginning tour of how to read a 990 and start to fill out a grant application form. Chum is an awesome one to work with because they also make public their annual reports, which take some of those numbers and kind of convert them into story. That's a good way to put it. Although with a nice, decent summary of the financial statements here, which cover a lot of those same questions and issues. Pause here. All right, everybody, I'm back. I want to talk a little bit about the Community Foundation longer form application. So I'm just going to close this short form up for a second. Guess I'll close the Ruby's Pantry up. You'll see that the longer form application, which is typically longer because you're asking for more money, it's going to ask for a little bit more detail, right? It's going to ask what is the geographic area served and what is the population served by the organization. It's going to ask for a longer description of the programs and activities currently engaged by the organization, including references to servant statistics, strengths, and accomplishments. You can find some of those in the 990. The annual report is a much better source for that, especially nowadays, because you're going to see infographics, which talk about how they've served 63 families, 1,009 individuals in the shelter program. In this cool infographic. The longer form application wants to know what your organization's relationship with other organizations working with similar missions are and what your role is relative to those organizations. They want a sense of where you fit into the ecology of the problems you're solving. It builds your credibility if you can talk about the relationship between, say, Chum and the Union Gospel Mission, or between, say, Chum and other organizations around the community, so that you're not, how do you say, the more money you ask for, the more they want to know that they're picking the right partner to give it to, and this helps them make that determination. There's that question about board members again and staff. Yeah. I'm going to come back to this for a second and say one more thing about the 990s. I just have not been screen sharing any of the things I've just been talking about. Sorry, guys. One more thing about the 990s. People tend to think it's not a big deal. And maybe it depends on your own set of priorities in the world. But a Duluth local journalist conducted over several months, actually, what he called the Great 990 Hunt, knowing that they're supposed to be available publicly to any citizen who asks for them. He walked into 12 nonprofits within the city of Duluth and said, "Hey, can I have a copy of your 990?" And only 2 of the 12 entities were able to legally comply with this federal requirement. So he wrote up an article basically scolding the organizations that were not able to meet their legal obligations. Why does this matter? It matters because this information is public and free and yours. And when you're working as a grant writer, having this public free information may save you some time and steps in terms of learning from your client what you need to do. And if you're considering partnering with an organization, I got to tell you, looking at their 990 can tell you a lot about them, how stable they are, how many people they are, what their real limits and strengths are as a partner organization. I'm going to pause this one last time and then talk a little bit about program design, which is the third part of grant writing, and then we'll be done. All right, so the third part of grant writing is basically designing a program proposal that has a scope you can accomplish within the amount of time and the amount of money that you have. And this is a huge, big art. Adam will be able to help you a lot with this. Also, frankly, if you have a partner organization and feel comfortable asking them for past grant applications, many times they're happy to share them, especially if they think they can help you help them in writing another grant as part of this class. There's no better way to learn about how to write a grant than by looking at other successful grants. Short of that, the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation also puts out press releases that talk about what kind of projects they've funded. So we talked earlier about the Four Cedars Environmental Fund. And in 2016, they gave $5,000 for a professional traineeship program for Hawk Ridge. They gave $20,000 for a St. Louis River Corridor revitalization project. $5,000 to the University of Wisconsin Superior for a botany blitz in the Boy Brule River. I have no idea what that is. I bet I could Google it, see what kind of project it was, and learn about what makes for a fundable, scalable project. And $5,000 for migratory bird habitat conservation. The Hermantown Community Fund gave $500 for the Hermantown all-night grad party. Well, that's interesting. The Knight Foundation Fund, we talked about that. 20 grand for the Renegade Theater Performance Company. Yeah, nice. The Lone Wolf Fund, which was that unique blend of outdoor education and medical stuff, gave $3 grand to the Autism Society of Minnesota and $3 grand to the Voyageurs National Park Association. Some of you may be looking at the Damiano Center. The Community Foundation gave them $5,000 for their kids' cafe. Anyway, gives you a sense of scale, how much money you can ask for, what you can ask for it for. A lot of these are very small grants. Some of them, though, the Knight Foundation one and the 15 grand for the Two Harbors Area Food Shelf from the Community Opportunity Fund. That's not bad. A little bit larger, still largest hovering around $20,000. So for purposes of going through the grant application, I'm going to rocket through things here and we can talk again. Adam, if you want more excellent video of me sitting in my living room talking, I will be glad to get that to you. The first thing you need to be able to articulate is the problem you're trying to solve. It has to be a problem solvable with the resources that the grant gives you. You will not eliminate hunger in Duluth with $5,000, but you might be able to better reach a target population If you can initiate a new program that will mitigate hunger for that target population over the course of the next 6 months to a year using $5,000. I know I said that awful fast, but this is a recording and you can come back to it. If we were in the classroom, I would be repeating it and paraphrasing it a bunch of different ways. They want to know who is involved in the decision-making process, because sometimes, frankly, you can develop a solution that fails because your partner organizations or your clients or your population to be served aren't interested in your solution. They don't want to fund a situation that won't reach out to the target population and work with the target population to make sure it's well designed. The next thing here that's so hard is differentiating between goals and objectives, right? Goals are big, lofty things, right? The mitigation of hunger in the Twin Ports region could be a goal, but an objective might be to get sandwiches into the hands of people in Morgan Park who otherwise don't have access to most of what we consider to be the food insecurity resources in Duluth, the soup kitchens and things like that, or the food shelves. Objectives tend to be measurable. Goals are less measurable, and that measurement is going to become important when we talk about the evaluation section. Here's where you talk about the activities. Who's going to carry out those activities and the time frame in which it's going to take place. If, for example, you're writing a $750,000 grant and you've hired one person to do all the work on it, you've probably under-resourced your grant. There are not enough people carrying out the activities, and that should be a red flag to the possible funder. If you intend to do things within a time frame that your funder believes to be inadequate, shows you're too ambitious, or dark side shows you don't know what you're doing enough to know how much time it could take, that'll hurt your chances of being funded. How will the proposed activities benefit the community? Being as clear as you can about the impact you expect to have. In the 21st century, what grantors are looking for at the end of the day are numbers that they can report and stories that they can share that show that you've been successful. You want to be able both to say, hey, we made food available to people who otherwise had no access to a food shelf. We served an additional 300 families over the course of 6 months using this exciting new program and reaching out to an underserved population. The story then that would come out of that would be the interviews with the people whose lives you've positively changed. So funders like to see that when their term paying for this is over, that you have plans for keeping it up. That's what sustainability refers to here. What do you want to happen as a result of your activities? Please describe your criteria for success. We will be successful if we have put sandwiches into the hands of 300 additional people. Can you tell I'm doing this at a time when I'm hungry because I keep talking about sandwiches? How will you measure your changes? And here's a good way to think about whether you feel like you can survey people, whether you feel like you can count things in a quiet, non-inobtrusive way, whether you feel like you can conduct interviews with some people who have taken advantage of your program. It used to be you could write a grant and you could say, oh, well, we'll count the number of people who take advantage of the service, and that will be enough. But they want more than that now. They want to know not just that people used your service, but that it's made some positive changes in their life, and you can't just count heads to get to that. Who will be involved in this evaluation? And here, what will you do with the evaluation results? They want to know that other nonprofits can learn from your best practices. The additional information section is a fun place to talk about more things. Okay, that was a super fast speed through. I'm going to pause it one last time and come back and talk about 2 more resources. All right, I try to thread this last bit into every spiel I give about grant writing. And it's about the Minnesota arts and cultural legacy and environment, the legacy tax that pays for so much grant giving in Minnesota, separate from the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation, which has its own story for each fund and each grant. The state of Minnesota has its own granting story, and it's a story of a kind of unique political alliance. So in 2008, Minnesotans passed the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment to the Minnesota Constitution. You should know making an amendment to a constitution is hard. This took a lot of careful politicking, a lot of alliance building across a lot of different populations with different interests. 3/8 of 1% of the state's sales tax will be dedicated to arts, nature, environment, cultural legacy. And here's how it breaks down: 33% to a clean water fund, 33% to an outdoor heritage fund, 14.25% to a parks and trails fund, and 19.75% to an arts and cultural heritage fund. What this means, for example, from my perspective, because of the things I'm interested in, there is as much money dedicated by the state government to the arts in the 7-county Arrowhead region, consisting of Carlton, St. Louis, Douglas. Is it Douglas? No, not Douglas. Carlton, St. Louis, Lake, Cook, Kuchiching, and one other county that I can't remember. Aiken? Is Aiken a county? Anyway, those 7 counties, which have a total of 250,000 people living in them altogether, have as much money available from the state for arts as the entire state of Missouri. And that's only representing 19.75% of that sales tax. The rest of it goes to the environment, trails, heritage, clean water. It's super cool. It's super wonderful. But it does mean that with this incredible increase in the amount of arts and cultural heritage funding, there's also an attempt to make sure that every project which is funded shows relevance to the arts, to the everyday citizen of Minnesota. So for example, I brought us here to the Arts Learning Grant Program. I've got the long set of instructions here from the Minnesota State Arts Board. And you can tell at the end that one of the stories they're trying to tell with this grant program is that this broadly affects and improves the lives of Minnesotans. It doesn't just affect and improve the lives of the 2 or 3 or 5 or 500 or 5,000 people who can take part in an arts event, but that it also reaches deeper into the community. So we talk about Minnesotans' art learning experiences shaping how they engage with the world around them, which begins with the person who takes part in the arts learning event, but moves bigger and broader than that. The story here is that if we bring art to every corner in every county of the state, then the lives of everyone in every corner of the state will get better. And that's the kind of story this grant program is trying to tell. That same set of money gets distributed in a hyper-local way through the regional arts councils. And again, there are a ton of grants available for that. I invite you to take a look at the Arrowhead Regional Arts Council because it is deeply committed to making arts and arts education funding available to everybody, the people in Duluth, of course, but also like the people who live in a town of 500 in the middle of nowhere. 500 is probably too small. Have you been to Finland, Minnesota? There's like 2,000 people there. They get art because of the funding mechanism that came out of that constitutional amendment. Minnesota is a great place for someone to be a grant writer because it's a great place for someone to be in an organization that benefits from grant writing. It's super cool that you're taking part in this exercise in the class, and I am grateful for the opportunity to support you and support Adam in this process. And thank you. Thanks for listening.